Our speaker today is Peter Thompson, also from Wisework. He is one of our founding directors. Peter is also a visiting fellow at Henley Business College, where he was also co-founder of the former Future Work Forum. He has vast experience in working with clients on their Wiseworking projects. Peter is also a frequent speaker at conferences, and he is also the co-author of the book Future Work, which I see is now in its second edition. So, without further ado, I would like you to hand you across to Peter to give his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. And welcome everybody to this, as Chris says, this fourth in our series of webinars. Last time, Chris talked about the preparation for launching a Wisework project, as we call it. And he was talking about things like running pilots, getting everything in place. So today we're really now into the first stage of the launch, the rollout of the scheme itself. Think about it, if we're going through the year in the life of, we're now 6 months through, you spent the last 6 months preparing for this date coming up. So what I really want to cover today is what you need to have in place, the preparation to make sure that everything's ready so that you have a smooth launch. The next session in September will talk more about how you then roll it out to the whole organization, and the final one will be consolidating and getting the whole process of Wiseworking into business as usual, really. So we're now at this stage of what we call the post-pilot evaluation. We need to learn from the pilots. Chris talked the last time about running pilots and making sure that you've got some lessons from them, understanding the objectives of the pilots, what you would try and measure as a result of them. And there will be things that work well, things that didn't work so well. And it's important to build those into the final version of what you want to launch. You may find you tried some working in the pilots, for example, some remote working, and it interrupted too much with teamwork, and people needed to compromise with the time and place they could work so everybody still got together. That would be the kind of lesson that was learned in those areas of the organization where you're running pilots. Now, of course, is a question of, well, if you have learned something there, how do you get those lessons out to the rest of the organization? After all, we're now talking about rolling this out to different parts of the organization. And the learnings from the pilot will influence how you do that. Do you automatically just go across the board and say, right now, this is smart, wise, flexible working for everybody? Do you do it department by department? In our experience, we work with several organizations. We've tended to do it bit by bit. So rather than a massive launch, you do it in a department, an operational department, not just a kind of backroom people. So something that represents the rest of the organization, but then we'll roll it out elsewhere. And one of the useful things there to do is, once not just the managers running the pilots, but the managers running the first implementation have actually got some experience, then use that experience to teach other managers as part of the training and the rollout. It's much more convincing to have a manager who's run a piece of flexible working, smart working in the organization talk to other managers than have us as the experts or some outside consultant or somebody from HR come and kind of tell them about the theory. And this is a critical stage. Will managers really be prepared for this rollout? A lot of them will say, yes, of course, I know it's flexible working. I'll give the policy to my people and they can kind of implement it. But as we've been saying and emphasizing up till now, this is not just a change in HR policy. This is a potential major culture change for many organizations. And those managers who've been used to presenteeism, managing people because they can see them, they will find it more difficult having to let go. A whole area of trusting and empowering people is something that lots of managers buy into in theory, but in practice then struggle with a bit. So there will need to be some resources to support this change. Is it not just the managers involved themselves, and not just the obvious support departments, for example, HR, but we're really looking here at, will all the support areas for the staff be in place? Will they fit in with the plan for space, for example? Very often these implementations are done with a office move in mind. So there will be a space plan, and these things are literally in concrete and can't get changed. We've often seen so many compromises made in the people plan because somehow the real estate bandwagon is rolling. And it's really important to make sure that a move to a new building doesn't fail because the people and possibly the systems, the IT and the organizational systems, are just not ready for that move. And the real estate ends up driving everything else. So it's really important to have those things fitting together. And so we've come up with three overlapping circles we've used in a previous presentation, but we're saying these are what we're calling the 3 S's, right? Staff, space, and systems. Staff, because primarily we're not just talking about people in general, we are talking about those people who are employees, whether they're full, part-time or whatever, but who have a relationship with a manager in the organization that is where the organization sees them as their staff in the broadest sense of the word, including feeling that they have a duty of responsibility to them, a duty of care to them as individuals, as people they value as their staff. Space, not just real estate, office space, workspace, but space more generally about where will people work, given the flexibility of new ways of working, of smart working, wise working. Inevitably, people can choose to work perhaps from home, not always suitable for everybody, perhaps from a coffee shop, sometimes mobile, but that workspace suddenly becomes something that's very flexible. Yet employers still have responsibility for making sure that it is appropriate, safe, and so on. So space more broadly is a key part of the picture. And then finally, systems. We've sometimes used the word technology in this circle, but it's important to recognize this is not just to do with hardware, software, and so on. This is to do with the systems of the way people work. It's not quite business processes, but almost, because there are ways of doing things that are built into the system. Having meetings regularly is a kind of a management system, and if you can't have your Monday morning meeting because not everybody is in the office on Monday morning anymore, maybe that system needs to change. So we're looking at broadly working systems, but a key part of this obviously is information technology systems that support the way we work. So let's just go through these 3 circles now in a bit more detail. Firstly, let's look at the staff one. And we now got to this stage where having launched run the pilots and learned from them, we're now ready to get into a launch phase and look at what the impact is on the staff. It's critical here to make sure that this isn't just seen now as an HR rollout, or the working party that's been looking at flexible working is doing this. Still needs to have senior champions support, probably as part of a launch program. Or we've seen examples of where the chief executive has recorded a video saying how he or she thinks it's a very important part of the changing way we work, etc. Particularly if it's not obviously associated with, say, an office move where there's a clear change driven from the top, but it's something slightly more subtle, then having senior champions, ideally, as I say, the chief executive, communicate the fact that we're making a conscious change in the organization about the way we work is quite important. But then that has to translate down at the launch, not again just to every manager giving their staff the video or saying read the policy. but actually sitting down with people. This is probably the most critical part of the whole year's process, is the conversation that now goes on between the manager and the individual about how they will like to work. And almost as important, the manager and the team. And in fact, we have a process that we use with organizations, and it's worked very successfully, on getting them to sit down and talk about how they work together as a team. And it's amazing. We've seen great examples of compromise across teams, where you get somebody who says, well, I really like to work at home on Fridays, and somebody else across the room saying, yeah, well, yes, that's great for you, but I'd like to as well if I could. And then coming to with the manager actually acting more of a facilitator than telling people what to do. Manager facilitating those discussions between the team members so that they agree that they will work in a certain way. It was a lovely example I had of, it was actually the management team in an ice skating centre run by a local authority in East London. And the manager said he got so frustrated with trying to manage the shift patterns of his employees coming and going that he said, eventually said, no, you can do what you like. He said, I locked them in the room and said, come up with a pattern that works. And he said they came up with something he never would have dreamt of as a manager. But then he said, from then on, he said, if anybody ever wanted to change something, somebody wanted to go to their kids' sports day, so wanted to swap a shift with somebody else, they didn't come to him. They went to their colleagues because they owned their new patterns of work. So it's an important part of that process, is getting the teams to feel like they are empowered. Again, we often talk about empowering staff and then don't do much about it. This is a great opportunity for managers to actually genuinely give people control over what how they work. And training managers in that is important. As is, we've done quite a lot of staff training or been involved in that. Often we will design a staff training module that then gets run by the people in the organization. And we've done, say, 1 or 2 day manager training, maybe half a day staff training. And that's not just on the new ways of working, but it's some of the skills that people need when they've got a level of control they've never had before. So time management, organizing themselves, particularly those people who have maybe relied on the discipline of regular hours or coming to work in the office, who are now told, right, you can work at home when you want to. It's not quite how do you get up in the morning, but it is to do with discipline and self-management. So it's something that staff need to be aware of. And then there's the whole question of where do staff go and get some support. We've worked with a lot of organizations on what we call ambassador programs, where you get one person in a team or in a small department who quite often it's somebody who is familiar with the systems in the organization, certainly isn't the senior manager, sometimes has been the PA to the senior manager. And that person is then the one you go to all the time when you need help. And they will help you with using a new piece of mobile technology without having to go to the IT techies to do it, with the new ways of anything from claiming your expenses to getting to organize meetings, just helping with all kind of more practical things, and getting the message through. So that's a key piece of what we recommend. And then communication. I mean, I had thought of spending a whole one of these webinars just on how you communicate effectively to get the right message out, and we just don't have time to do that. But obvious things like newsletters, leaflets, and so on. I mentioned video from the chief executive, using forums, intranet, the discussion, things that exist already, and probably having a fairly major launch event, so it's high profile, and then keeping that up all the time. And then last but not least, in the staff area is all the kind of practical HR policies. not going to go through the list in great detail, except to say that it is important to get some of these legal things right before sending people off to work from home, particularly on the contract front. If you're recognising people are contracted to go work from home, then obviously they need to look at some of these things. So HR policies are definitely needed. Moving on then to space. Well, here we're looking at working from home as one option, working from other offices. So there is a question of how and where you get to work. For some people, working from home is not suitable. We've had examples of organisations we've worked with where they just don't like people working from home at all, but they will be very happy from them working from satellite offices and so on. And then the obvious things about reallocating space in the office: who's going to get a permanent desk, who's going to get a hot desk, and why, and the rules around hot desking, without getting too formal with the space booking, desk booking systems. That there is a need for people to understand the new way of working. I don't have an allocated desk anymore. How do I get one? What do I need to do? And so on. And this is all part of the whole activity-based workspaces approach, which is you choose the workspace appropriate to the activity you're carrying out at that particular time, and the workspace itself therefore has to be able to flexibly, particularly this stage, because people don't really know how they're going to work until they get into this. They may find over the first few months they change and experiment with the way that they are working. So the whole space has to be very flexible to match the demands, and bear in mind that we're not just talking office and home space, we're talking about alternative spaces as well. And then lastly, systems. Right, well, there's obvious IT things about people are going to be mobile and are going to be using their smartphones and devices. Will they work? And very importantly, are they secure? Their confidentiality issues. Can information that is held in the building physically be transmitted out for security reasons, and so on? All that has to be addressed. Hopefully, this has already been addressed, so we're not at this stage of about to launch suddenly saying, oops, what's happened about security? The IT people will have been involved over the last 6 months. They will have come up with procedures and so on that do allow for this. So that's one area of systems, but we are talking also about not just things like video conferencing and discussion forums. Social media, effective use of email, and so on. We are also obviously talking about broader use of systems in the more general sense. How do people working from home get the kind of things they used to get in the office, access to the stationery cupboard or something like that? All those things need to be thought of. Just systems of communicating, of meeting with each other. And of course, in many cases, we're not talking about having to introduce lots of new technology.
That's quite interesting.
Lots of new ways of doing things.
We have quite a few questions popping up here.
Again, part of our
first one is really to do with that space issue. How much evidence do you see of employers starting to make use of the new networks of things like co-working hubs, third-party managed and run centres?
I think we're
seem to be popping up all over the UK. I, for instance, have made a lot of use of the Easy Everything facility at Victoria, and some of the co-working hubs for small meetings with people. You've also got hotels and catering for this sort of thing. How much evidence of that do you actually see happening?
I see quite a lot now. Originally, I think the co-working centres tended to be mainly places where small companies started and set up, or individual self-employed people went to do a bit of work because it wasn't appropriate to work at home. But more and more, I've seen groups from larger organisations going in there, particularly where they don't have a local office. Say, so you've got, I don't know, banks, for example, closing down some of their branches, which they used to use when they had a meeting in that particular town. So now, instead of going to the local branch, the people from head office coming out will go and meet with some of the local employees in the Regis office.
Okay, thank you. The next one, I guess, is more of a comment than a question.
From a lot of
with reference to working at home, there may also be a need to take into account the other users and residents of the house. Some years ago, I worked for Cable and Wireless, and my deputy, for example, was ideally suited to home working, passed all the tests we chucked at him and so on. But the minute he took any piece of paper home with the company logo on it, his wife of 30 years threw her hands up in horror and almost ordered him out of the front door because it was her space. She didn't want it used for work. It's just something to think about. So in some instances, you said home working may not be appropriate, and I guess that could be one of them. It's just something to build into the mix.
Yeah, I think because I guess in my experience, what we've seen is people. It's a bit the grass is greener on the other side, isn't it? People think, "Oh, this is great. I don't need to go to work. I can work from home." Then they actually find that, as you say, there are problems with maybe interruptions from other people at home. They don't have a nice quiet space. If they're lucky enough to have a spare bedroom or a study or something, they can close the door. That's great. But the kids come home from school and they interrupt and all of that. Now, that's not necessarily bad if somebody can schedule their time so that they take the time off in the afternoon, have tea with the kids, and come back and work later. But for those people who, although they're working from home, need to be on duty at certain times, undisturbed by kids' noises in the background.
Question here regarding
it's important they have the appropriate sort of
what are the security, the physical security implications of people working on the move?
And the same with working
you mentioned obviously data security, people looking over your shoulder. What are company policies about protecting the laptop, protecting the smartphone, whilst you're on a train or that sort of thing?
To work, despite the fact that it looks sometimes very attractive to work from home. Yes, the most reasonable sized organizations, the IT departments are quite sensitive, obviously, about security. So they have passwords and dongles and security numbers that keep changing, all those sort of things. So it's quite difficult to electronically break into somebody's account. And information on hard disks on laptops left in the back of a taxi are encrypted enough so that nobody can break them easily. That's all fine. But then, as you say, you sit next door to somebody on the train and look over their shoulder, and you can clearly see what they're doing. I went to a conference where somebody from Cisco was speaking, and he said, we have two pieces of equipment we give to our mobile employees besides the technology. One is a screen filter, and you put this over the front of the screen and it narrows the angle that you can view. So if somebody's looking over your shoulder, the chances are they can't read what's on the screen because you can only read it when you're looking directly on. And the other one is a piece of chain and a padlock. because they said what happens is that people go stay in hotels and they leave they start doing their email, whatever, leave the laptop on the table in the bedroom, go down to dinner, come back, the laptop's gone.
Agreed.
Because laptop thieves know that that's the time that people happen.
Something here as well, more of a comment as well, that you have to make sure that all your office systems and stuff are robust enough to support the new styles of working, but also that the people involved in putting this stuff together also have real jobs to do, so it may be necessary for people to step in and help them or take some of their workload while they're actually working on the project itself, because otherwise they'll do their work on the project during the day at 6 o'clock in the evening, sit down and do their own job for the rest of the day, and that can lead to burnout and stress and all that sort of thing. So quite a good point there.
Yeah, yes, I don't. But if I can build on that one, but what we've seen happen sometimes is you get a working party for the first 6 months of the project are there because they're designing what we're going to do, making decisions about the new real estate, about the working practices and so on. And then as soon as the scheme is launched, so just about now in the year, that gets abandoned because they've kind of done their work, and then the thing is sort of left over to HR or somebody other to implement. And we've seen it sometimes go wrong because actually there's a critical role at this stage for the project manager for the whole thing and his or her kind of supporting team, including clearly.
Okay, well, I guess that's all we've got time for now, so we're coming up to 12:30. Thank you for taking part in the webinar. The next webinar in the system, in the series, is on the 8th of September at 2 o'clock on the theme of the rollout, which is the next part of the implementation process. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Our email addresses are on the website at wisework.co.uk. I wish you all a happy and sunny summer, and thank you for taking part. Goodbye.